Alright, so as you mentioned earlier, we've got quite a few things coming for Battlegrounds. First off, we've got a slew of different all-track valley improvements. Namely some improvements to kind of the flow of respawn. One of the things we're going to do is players won't respawn in their starting tunnels anymore until there's nowhere else to spawn. One of the things that's intended to do is it's actually intended to encourage players that have kind of gotten beaten back to play some defense. The location of the Alliance tunnel right now actually does encourage Alliance players to play some defense because if they're respawning there, they kind of flow naturally right back into Stormfight Graveyard. Whereas the Horde tunnel right now, if you get sent there, you're not really encouraged at all to go back and play some defense. You're encouraged to try to work your way back to the front of the map. In addition, we have some other improvements there. We're going to be evening out some of the NPCs. And also, we have some anti-FK measures coming in. I'll talk a little bit how that's going to work. So with All-Track Valley, obviously we see a lot of issues where players find it's actually very effective to sit there and be AFK in the battleground. Unfortunately, this is kind of, to some degree, natural consequence of the size of the battleground. Once you're only one of 40 people, you kind of feel a little bit more anonymous. You feel like you can sort of get away with sitting there in the tunnel not doing anything. It has to do with the fact that you start off in a very safe area inside that tunnel, so it's pretty safe to not get killed by the players, etc. There are a lot of different contributing factors, the way the honors are distributed, and some other factors. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually give the players the ability to report other players for being AFK, and sort of in the same way that you can report spam. You'll be able to pop up the map, you'll be able to right-click on somebody's dot on the map and say, report AFK. Once enough players have reported that person for AFK, then a debuff countdown is going to start on that player. And if they don't get into combat before it expires, they get another debuff that stops their honor gain until they get into combat. So if you are actually playing the game for whatever reason, then all you have to do is you get into combat and the debuff goes away, all those reports get set to 0, and you can go about your business and keep gaining honor. But for people that are sitting in there doing absolutely nothing, they'll get reported and they'll stop gaining any honor. So hopefully that should make it so that there really isn't a very strong incentive to do that, because you just get nailed with being AFK and then you don't get anything out of it. So in addition, we're going to be doing some honor distribution and balance improvements. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the issues with All-Track Valley is you get a lot of honor just for being there in the early process when some of those early named NPCs are dying. We're actually planning to shift some of that honor gain to later parts of the battleground that more highly encourage you to actually win. And finally, we have some queue improvements for Battlegrounds in general in mind. Not only would we like to once again introduce queuing as a group for All-Track Valley, but we'd also like to continue to kind of refine the way the queue works, because right now we're very limited in terms of the number of different battlegrounds that we can add to the World of Warcraft, because as it stands, each battleground that we add spreads people out more and more among the different battlegrounds. And what's really important is we need to have critical mass for any given battleground to make sure that we can do all of our matchmaking. We want to be able to put the pre-mates up against other pre-mates more often. We want to be able to put the pugs up against pugs. So we've got to keep that critical mass. And the way the queue system is set up right now, it's not really set up to handle that. So one of the things that we've been considering right now, and this isn't something that is necessarily guaranteed to happen, but one of the things we're talking about is going toward more of a model where you pick the size of battleground you want to participate in. So let's say I want to participate in a 15 on 15 or a 10 on 10, etc. And then it'll put you into any one of the different 15 on 15 battlegrounds rather than actually selecting a specific battleground. So that would allow us to add in unlimited number of 15 on 15 battlegrounds, but everybody's in the queue for all those at a given time. It wouldn't dilute the population. Another thing we're very interested in doing is adding the concept of guild battlegrounds. And what I mean by that, there's been a lot of interest expressed over the years in terms of guilds being able to challenge each other, fight each other. So what we'd like to do is add this concept of being able to join the battleground, as a guild, and potentially have your guild have a rating for the battlegrounds. So it's sort of in the same kind of mechanic as the arena system. Your guild will be able to hold a rating for a battleground and improve that rating by winning and lose rating by losing. and potentially be able to gain some interesting new rewards, some new perks, new benefits for your guild by having your guild do well in the guild battlegrounds. And of course, we plan to have some siege weapons and destroyable buildings. So this being one of our key features for Wrath of the Lich King, it makes sense, of course, to have a battleground that features that kind of gameplay. We've also tossed around the idea of incorporating that sort of gameplay into other battlegrounds like Alterac Valley. Not sure whether or not that in particular is going to happen, but it is something that we've been talking about. But we do know that we will be adding a new battleground that is really focused around siege weapons and destroyable buildings. You'll get in there, it should be pretty fast paced, you'll get your siege weapons, you'll be able to blow up enemy buildings, you'll be able to shoot at other players with your siege weapons. We're planning on having siege weapons that function differently for the different kind of racial styles. So for example, the undead meat wagon that throws corpses might actually do more damage to areas of players versus the catapult that's throwing a giant boulder, which might do better against certain types of buildings. So next what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about our world PvP philosophy. So like I mentioned, we have these three different major areas of PvP. We've got battlegrounds, we've got world PvP, and we've got arenas. So world PvP is intended to be a focus for spontaneous PvP. Obviously world PvP happens on its own on just about any PvP server when somebody's trying to do a quest and some other guy comes up and tries to jack him while he's doing it. But that isn't really the kind of world PvP that we're talking about here. The PvP that we're talking about here is giving players outdoor world objectives that have some consequence and some feeling of meaning in the game world as a whole. So again, even world PvP, a lot like Battlegrounds, should be objective driven. It shouldn't just be random. And it should also reward participation. So unlike Battlegrounds, it shouldn't be as much oriented around winning or losing, because as game designers, we have far less control over who actually shows up for world PvP. I really, as the game designer, have no clue whether or not 15 Alliance and 10 Horde are going to show up, or whether 40 Horde are going to show up and 10 Alliance. So we want to make sure that you don't come away with nothing if you happen to be on the team that loses. This is why, in a lot of cases, the existing PvP outdoor mechanics that we have, you get like your Hala battle tokens, etc., just for having gotten kills, even if you don't actually succeed in defending Hala or taking it over. In addition, one of the really core points is that world PvP should affect the world in some way or another. I think that one of the major things players like to see with their world PvP is they want to have a feeling that it has some kind of impact, like capturing Hala had some sort of impact because now you have the advantages of having that town, or taking over the spirit towers around Ockendune, and how that gives your team an advantage because now you get spirit shards off the Ockendune bosses. So some of the things we've learned from all the different world PvP things that we've tried out. We've got our first example, Silithus. One of the things we learned from that is that it has to feel compelling, right? It can't just be contrived sort of gameplay that is sort of tacked onto an existing zone. We need to make sure that the PvP gameplay there feels like it's substantive. It's got to feel like it makes sense to the players. Something we learned from Eastern Plaguelands is that the reward has to feel meaningful. A lot of players say that when they took over the towers in Eastern Plaguelands, it didn't really feel very meaningful because you just get this kind of modest buff to what you were doing in Eastern Plaguelands, and there really wasn't that much kind of end-game activity at the time going on in Eastern Plaguelands itself. So kind of players really sort of asked, well, I did the event, and it was kind of interesting and all that, but really what did it matter? Hellfire Peninsula, what we learned there is that pacing is very important. Hellfire Peninsula just kind of goes on and on and on and on. It never really ends. It's important for players to feel like they've established some sort of outcome and there's some sort of persistent result. And Zangar Marsh, what we learned from that is that clarity is really important. We've got to make sure that players understand how the PvP objectives work. And Zangar Marsh is a little bit too obfuscated for a lot of people to instantly get as soon as they get into the zone. They don't know exactly how it's going to work.